You know someone like this. Maybe it's a friend from university. Maybe it's your cousin. Maybe it's that colleague everyone likes, but nobody can quite figure out. They're completely invisible online. No posts, no stories, no highlights reel. And when you bring it up, and at some point you always bring it up, they just shrug and say something like, "It's not really my thing." And you let it go. But the question doesn't, because somewhere between the casual answer and the back of your mind, something doesn't quite add up. In a world where almost everyone performs their life online, why would someone just opt out? What are they protecting? What do they know that the rest of us don't? Stay with me, because what the psychology actually reveals is going to challenge some assumptions you've probably never thought to question. First, let's be honest about what posting is really for. Most of us tell ourselves a comfortable story about why we post. We're sharing memories, staying in touch, keeping family updated. And sure, there's some truth in that. But researchers studying digital behavior keep finding something underneath all of it. A mechanism called impression management. It's not a new concept. Sociologist Irving Goffman wrote about it decades before smartphones existed. The basic idea is this: human beings are constantly, often unconsciously, managing how they appear to others. Every caption, every photo choice, every candid that took 12 attempts, it's all part of curating a version of yourself for public consumption. We're not just documenting our lives. We're constructing an identity and then broadcasting it. And in exchange, we're looking for something: validation, connection, proof that our existence is registering with other people. That's not a character flaw. It's deeply human, but it does raise a question worth sitting with. What kind of person quietly walks away from that entire system? Profile 1. The person who doesn't need the mirror. Here's something researchers keep finding when they study people with low or zero social media presence. A surprising number of them score unusually high on what psychologists call internal locus of identity. In plain terms, their sense of self isn't built on outside feedback. For most people, external validation acts like a mirror. You post, people respond, and the response tells you something about who you are and how you're perceived. It's not vanity, it's actually how a lot of people regulate their self-concept. But some people don't need that mirror. They already know what they think of their own vacation, their own achievement, their own Saturday morning. The experience was enough. Turning it into content, packaging it, captioning it, watching the numbers, would feel less like sharing and more like cheapening something that was already complete. These aren't people who are hiding. They're people who already arrived somewhere most of us are still trying to get to. But wait, don't skip this part. Because here's where it gets more complicated and honestly, more interesting. Not every non-poster is operating from a place of psychological abundance. There's a second profile that looks identical from the outside but is coming from a completely different place internally. And this one, the research suggests, is far more common than anyone likes to admit. These are people paralyzed not by indifference to audience, but by terror of it. Social anxiety in digital spaces works in a specific, almost cruel way. It's not that you don't want to participate, it's that the gap between wanting to share something and hitting post feels like standing at the edge of a cliff. What if no one responds? What if the post goes quiet and stays quiet and you have to look at that silence for days? What if someone screenshots it, or misreads it, or laughs at it in a group chat you'll never see? For people wired this way, the safest move is perpetual lurking. They consume everything. They react to nothing. And from the outside, they look like they just don't care about social media, when actually social media has a grip on them tighter than almost anyone else in their feed. Profile 3. And this is the one that should make you think. There's a framework in psychology called self-determination theory. It argues that human beings have 3 core psychological needs that, when met, produce genuine well-being: competence, connection, and autonomy. Here's what's interesting about social media. For a lot of people, it's become the primary infrastructure for meeting those needs. You feel competent when a post performs well. You feel connected through comments and DMs. You feel autonomous because you're the author of your own profile. But there's a third type of non-poster who has built a life where all 3 of those needs are met. through completely different channels. Deep, face-to-face relationships that don't need a caption. Work that provides real feedback, not algorithmic. A sense of self that was constructed through experience rather than engagement metrics. These people aren't rejecting social media out of fear or superiority. They just genuinely don't need it for the things it's designed to provide. And because they don't need it, the absence isn't a sacrifice. It's just a neutral fact about their life. That's the profile most people never consider when they're wondering what's wrong with the person who doesn't post. The answer might be nothing. They just found another way in. What the research actually says about your mental health and the feed. A study out of the University of Pennsylvania tracked participants who reduced their social media use to around 10 minutes per day. Within weeks, the researchers measured significant drops in reported loneliness and depression. Not moderate changes, significant ones. Separate research has consistently shown that passive consumption, scrolling without posting, is the most psychologically damaging mode of social media use. It activates social comparison almost constantly and almost involuntarily. You're not even looking for reasons to feel behind. The feed delivers them anyway. Here's what this means for the person who isn't posting. They're usually also not doing the passive consumption spiral either, which means they're quietly avoiding one of the most reliably mood-destabilizing habits of modern life, without even framing it as a choice. So, what are we actually talking about here? We live in a moment where the pressure to document your life has been so thoroughly normalized that opting out looks unusual, suspicious even. We've built an entire cultural logic around the idea that if something isn't shared, it didn't quite count. That memories need witnesses, that experiences are somehow more real once they've been validated by a stranger's thumb. The person who doesn't post is quietly refusing that logic every single day. Not because they read an article about digital minimalism, not because they're trying to be mysterious, but because somewhere, consciously or not, they decided that the moment in front of them was enough on its own. Complete without an audience, real without a record, meaningful without metrics. And the most unsettling thing about looking closely at the psychology of why people don't post? The research keeps pointing in the same direction. In a world optimized for visibility, the quietest people in the room might be the ones who have already figured out what the noise was costing everyone else. If that idea landed somewhere, drop a comment below. Which profile do you think you are? Because I have a feeling the answers are going to be more honest than most people expect.